Okay, Dr. Ted, we are now live on the Lifestylist podcast. Welcome to the studio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've only done a few recordings here at this new location, and it's really fun to have people come in and hang out before. So for those of you listening, we've just spent the past, hour and a half shooting the shit. And when that happens, I'm always like, we should have just had the mics on. But we were talking about some off the record stuff that we can't talk about anymore. I'm sorry. But I guarantee we're going to get into some crazy stuff. So welcome.
And I guarantee you guys, this place is amazing. He has a wonderful garden at the back and his biohacking shed, which is actually quite an expensive shed. And this setup here, it's actually fantastic.
Cool, man. Well, I'm excited to sit down with you. I've been looking forward to this one. You know, as I told you, I just got back from Spain. My flight was canceled on the way back, which was a lesson in trusting the divine order of things and kind of surrendering to that. But as a result, I didn't have as many days to recover from that trip. So one of the things we're going to talk about later on in this conversation is all of your insane jet lag hacks.
Yes.
Because as a doctor, you've got a lot of things up your sleeve that I've not even heard of, surprisingly. So that's going to be great. But you guys came in and I got a little, what's it called? A troche?
Yes.
A troche of oxytocin.
Yes.
Which I needed today because I didn't get enough hugs. and then all sorts of other various and sundry things. Tell me about this blue...
Carnitine?
About the carnitine.
Well, the name blue carnitine is derived from methylene blue. And then Ka is for caffeine. Na is for cannabidiol, and teen is for nicotine, which is the ingredient of this blue troche, which you dissolve, between your upper lip and your gum. And it makes you limitless for about 3 to 4 hours without any jitters or any bad come down.
Those blue things, which our mutual friend Tim, that we're going to be joining at the London Summit, he gives me those things every time I see him, and I'm always like, now I'm like a crackhead. I'm like, do you got any of the blue pills? The blue pills, I'm like, usually I like the red pill, metaphorically speaking, but those things are amazing. Now the methylene blue is interesting. There's a lot of, you try to buy it online, and it's made in China. Yeah. It's a little dubious. Yeah. It looks and tastes so chemical that I've never really trusted it. But tell me how that methylene blue works as a nootropic.
As a nootropic. So this backstory here that no one knows about is that I actually created this formula 3 years ago in my kitchen as a gum. All right. And then it was tasting fine. It was doing fine. And then time to find someone to actually make it for me. No confectioner would touch it. Apparently, gum should be made by a confectioner. I didn't know that. I thought you could go to some manufacturer. And because it turned all of their equipment blue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
right.
What it is, I saw the final studies on, the first study rather on human memory. Which use 100 milligrams of methylene blue. And I said, I bet you this is like a one-time deal that they wanted to measure, but you could probably use it in a lower dose on a daily basis for improvement of your memory. And it's on some parts, it's an electron donor. It donates electrons in your electron transport chain on the mitochondria. So, but on the other hand, on other studies, it shows that it's an electron receptor. So it has that kind of biphasic action for and for me, all I want is actually the effect, right? I want to have intact short-term memory, especially if I'm lecturing or especially if I'm fucking jet lagged. And you want your brain to rev up, and you're supposed to be in a lecture, and you just arrived, and you're 12 hours out of sync, and it just works.
I love them. And before I forget, give me the website for them. And
Transcriptions.com.
Transcriptions.com.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like prescription, but it's troche.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is the little lozenge you put between your cheek and gum.
Yes. A troche is just actually a mechanism of delivery, right? It's spelled Troche. So for those who are listening, if you see that word, you can pronounce it correctly. And what it is either used sublingually, if it's a sublingual lozenge, or as this is used as a classic troche, where you don't like actually saliva to dissolve it for you, because that will be too fast.
Interesting.
So you let it melt between your cheek and your upper gum.
And with the methylene blue, I mean, what was it invented for? Was it invented for health, or is it like a dye or something?
No, interestingly, methylene blue is actually used medically.
Oh.
Right? If you get methemoglobinemia and all of those types of acute conditions. So it's a drug, but anecdotally, I had a client who grew up in France, and he said, Dr. Ted, when I was younger, he said, we used to have these blue lozenges that we'd take whenever we had sore throat, and then the sore throat would go away, but we'd have blue pee. And I said, oh, that's methylene blue, right? So the other thing that I know that it can do is actually kill off the candida in your gut. So if you have candida yeast infestation, yeah, it actually kills the candida
really?
in your gut. Yeah.
What a trip.
It's used as a cleaner of aquariums.
Wow.
So, but that's lower grade. It's not pharmaceutical grade.
Well, that's the thing, I think. Yeah, that's right. That's what I found.
Yeah.
My friend Andy Nilo always has a blue tongue. Oh, methylene blue, man, it's the best nootropic. And then so I was like, oh, I'll go on Amazon, try to find it. And there was just like a deluge of shady looking companies and, it's fish clean, tank cleaner, all this weird stuff. So I kind of gave up on the search until I found you guys' thing. So
it's my preferred mode of delivery
right.
because blue is the new smart. Of course, and the other thing is it's my preferred mode of delivery because the delivery is much more gentle rather than if you pop it or it needs to get absorbed. Here it has a direct hit on you, but not that heavy a punch that you actually feel a jitter or something like that, especially with nicotine and caffeine in it.
Right, and it has a little CBD too.
The CBD is 5 milligrams. It rounds out any of the caffeine that's in there. Actually, the caffeine that's in a single troche is only 1/2 cup of coffee. Right, so 1/2 cup of coffee. I encourage people not to use more than 4 troches a day, and that's equivalent to 2 cups of coffee, 1 stick of cigarette, the nicotine in a cigarette, that's 2 milligrams. And methylene blue totals about 20 milligrams. So,
and what is the nicotine's role?
Nicotine is has been studied as an actual nootropic. Again, it increases memory. It increases for me, what it does is it actually increases your capacity to put things together in an integrated fashion when you're speaking out, like when you're delivering a lecture or when you have to address a group of people or holding a meeting. It keeps you. I treat it like my legal Adderall. Because it focuses you. It keeps your brain firing synchronously, if that makes sense to you. And that's how I see the nicotine. But nicotine works on acetylcholine receptors, which are, of course, the receptors for memory.
Okay. Yeah. And this is totally accidental that I opened with this because there's a whole backstory I want to get, but we'll reverse engineer the conversation. But while we're on the nootropics, we might as well just go all in because it's an area of fascination for me. For various reasons, I think, in my life, felt a bit limited and more dim than I know I am innately in terms of just memory, word recall, just comprehension, communication, verbalization, reading, writing, just basic intelligence. I feel like I'm fairly smart, but oftentimes, the brain fog and can't catch a word and things like that. So when I started experimenting with nootropics, it was like, oh my God, finally my brain turned on. And one of the ones that I like the most, which is kind of old school and not that hot at the moment, is paracetam.
Oh, okay.
I find when I take paracetam, which I did a couple hours ago, that my verbal acuity, I mean, it's tough to quantify, but I would say up to 20% better on paracetam. Just the ability to hold thoughts and word recall and dovetail conversations and just think of those obscure words that might otherwise elude me. It's just, I get this fluidity.
Tip of the tongue phenomenon.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you know anything about the racetams or
yes,
paracetam?
and the oxiracetam, of course, if you take it, it actually has a phase where you have this clarity of vision. For some would have it for 20 minutes. I usually have it for about an hour. You can take a look at all the different racetams are there. There's phenylpiracetam, there's piracetam, and so these are the racetam group, but the granddaddy, of course, is piracetam, right? And the safety profile is great. Many people have taken it already, so you're safe if you want to take piracetam. But I want to clue in your listeners actually is that there are two aspects to doing nootropics, right? The nootropics can only elevate you to the base health of your neurons, of your brain cells. So you have to get yourself healthy first before you get the full benefits of the nootropics. In other words, with the way I teach my students, for example, you cannot hack performance without hacking health first, right? So you have to have optimal health first before you can have optimal performance. Same thing with anything in the body, and it goes for the brain. You have to have a healthy brain first before you can hack it to optimal performance. If you are lacking all of these vitamins, minerals, and you have mercury poisoning and all of this other stuff that's going on in your system, those things have to go out first, right? Otherwise, you're just pushing in all of these nootropics and you're taxing your brain further.
Right? That's such a good point, and I've kind of come to that realization myself, having met so many people on the journey at different phases now, and someone will want to try qualia or modafinil or racetam or something, and I'll inquire a little bit about the rest of their lifestyle, and I'll just say, well, they say, oh, I'm getting brain fog, and I'll ask, how often do you go number 2, And they go, oh, I take a dump about every 3 days. And I'm like, and you expect your brain to work? No pill is going to fix that. So it really is true, right? If you're toxic and, all of these other things downstream, I think I take for granted that people have already figured all that out, and now they're just at the level of like fine tuning and optimizing. Well, so it's a really good point.
As a side point, was just talking to someone at the airport coming here. I said, people think that toxins are like mercury and fluoride and all of that. I said, toxins can be people too. They're toxic relationships. I mean, they impede your performance, right? They will impede your performance. You have an argument with someone that you love before you go on something, you are not going to perform very well, right? So these are the kinds of things that I do, but I like to measure things. So, for example, if I optimize you, then I would measure the metabolites inside your body. Your metabolites are actually small molecules that are produced by your cells, right? And so the science of that is called clinical metabolomics, and we can measure those now. And what I do is actually I balance those to what's called optimal levels. And optimal levels will be between ages 21 to 30. Okay? Now, as to your point, for example, for brain fog, right? As a physician, the first thing that I think about when you have brain fog is, of course, a poor thyroid function. So I would check your hormones too and take a look. Take a look at that, because maybe your inability to wake up in the morning, your lethargy, etc., and even your brittle hair is just due to the fact that you're not producing enough thyroid hormone.
Wow.
See? So I measure hormonal levels, I measure nutrient levels, and then bring them all to the level when humans are supposed to be healthiest, between age 21 to 30. But even then, I put a caveat on, because there was a study, for example, in Europe, that this was 60,000 males that were, they took a look at the testosterone levels, and they were dropping. They were lower than the previous cohort that they measured. So, well, we have to deal with this, right? However, the way I deal with it is as a network. You cannot just move one thing and expect the other, and expect the whole thing to correct itself. Testosterone is connected to your growth hormone. It's connected to your thyroid hormone. It's connected to all of this. They're networks. In other words, they're nodes. So you cannot just move one and expect the whole thing to get well. In fact, that was our mistake. Early on in anti-aging medicine, when they started to just give estrogen alone without opposing progesterone, for example. They just started to give testosterone alone, which is still very common now, without giving all the other anabolic and catabolic hormones to the body. Because you said earlier that you wanted to hack jet lag, you better make sure that those levels of your hormones are optimal first, and then you could hack jet lag. However, you should remember that when you're changing time zones, say for me, here to Manila, that's no, not here. East Coast to Manila is a 12-hour time difference. At midnight, midnight there would be lunchtime here, and I would be starving. And lunch there would be midnight here. So the first day, my stomach would actually be closed. My intestines are not moving, right? So what you do is you put in the appropriate timing of the hormones that will simulate what it is producing during the day, right? So that you're within 2 or 3 days, you're actually good.
I've heard you talk about that, and it makes total sense. I mean, it's the other piece to the circadian rhythm, right? Of getting in. Like what I always do is just try to get grounded as soon as possible, find a body of water, do my best to watch the sunrise and the sunset as soon as I land, to at least get the light part of it right.
Yeah.
But I do notice this huge disconnect with the microbiome. My gut gets wrecked anytime I switch time zones. And so I'm seeing, the neurotransmitters and the hormones, you could see how that gets off balance. But how, if someone's not a doctor like you and can't travel with a bunch of needles full of the various hormones, how could the layman, the layperson,
it's actually very simple.
Do that?
It's really very simple. The last thing that turns around in the slowest that turns around in terms of rhythm is your gut. Okay? So when you know that you're already pooping at your regular time in the place, you know that you're fully adjusted. Okay? So that's the first thing that you take care of. Okay? So be gentle. For example, when it's expecting midnight, it's midnight and expecting to be closed, and it's lunchtime where you are, feed it some broth, right? Be gentle with it. And then don't forget to take, if you're eating solid food, don't forget to take your enzymes with it, because even the enzymatic production is actually down to digest your food. Right. So the enzymes are supplements, and so are so are your spores, for example, for probiotics, right? You could carry those spores without keeping them cool, and you take a couple of those, just to make sure that even your microbiota get jet lagged. They're asleep at the time.
They're confused, right? Yeah,
they are.
That's the sense I get, because there's always this dysbiosis experience. And I was stoked to see, we were in my kitchen before this, and I was like, oh, God, I hope I get the answer I want here. What do you think of my Just Thrive spore-based probiotics? And you gave them the thumbs up.
Yes, I actually like it, because it will actually grow in the colon where it's supposed to grow. The second thing is they're tropicalized, so they're heat resistant, so you don't need to refrigerate them. I actually in the brand that I had them make for me, I removed just one species of bacteria in there because of a study that was not in there. But as it has very good studies by itself.
Is the issue that if you take because I interviewed Tina Anderson, which will have been published by the time your show comes out, so my regular listeners will already know, there's a whole probiotic episode before this. I don't know the dates on these things, but at any rate, I interviewed Tina Anderson, and she was giving me all sorts of interesting information about the whole probiotic industry and stuff. And what I gathered from it was that most of them that you take don't ever colonize and don't really make it. They die because of stomach acidity and all kinds of stuff. So it doesn't matter how many billions it says it had or how many strains, that it's
even
kind
now
of a waste.
Even now it's shotgun, right? So what I do is I do a stool test and take a look at the colonies of bacteria you have in there, right? So you could see whether or not you have Akkermansia municiphala and all of these other wonderful organisms that are supposed to be there. It is unfortunate that the Human Microbiota Project, for example, closed down because we were still unable to identify the core that's common, the core microbiota that's common to all. However, it's still basically shotgun out there when you take a probiotic, right? Even if you measure, there are still no targeted probiotics available out there, and that's where we're going to, right? After you measure what you're lacking in, then you could actually give the actual targeted probiotic for that person. It becomes customized.
Do you think where we're going is us to have the ability to test the biome, find out what bacteria we're deficient in, then make spore versions of those so that they are sure to colonize?
If the bacteria actually is the spore-forming variety, right? So,
how did I know there was no simple answer to that? I want to back up because it's fun. I always have my list of questions just so I don't forget the really important ones. But then it's fun when the conversation just is so natural and deviates. But I know I skipped something I wanted to touch on, back to the kind of nootropics part. And when I came in, you and Roland said, "Hey, we brought you a couple gifts, and you have these specially made sort of private label troches." And you said, "Hey, this one's oxytocin." You gave me a little baggie of those, and I thought, to be honest with you and my audience listening now, I was emotionally having a little bit of a hard time today due to a number of personal factors, and so I was like, and literally not like getting hugs, or I didn't really see any humans today. I was very kind of solo-mish. And so you gave me this oxytocin, and I took a quarter of a little troche. And I don't know if it was because you guys had such great energy, but I got super happy, and I was pretty depressed, to be honest, today, And so what is this oxytocin that you can take exogenously, A, and B, if one was to do that on a regular basis, what would the typical application be, why and when? And finally, would that diminish our body's ability to produce it at any point if it was done on a regular basis?
Well, the dose that you took is really only a very small dose. It's the same argument as is being given for the use of growth hormone for anti-aging, for example. It's a tickling dose. It's nothing compared to what bodybuilders use. So in other words, there's a term called supraphysiologic dose, right? That's when it's used as a drug. But here, you're only using it at a very small dose to balance out your right then when we met you, you had an oxytocin deficiency syndrome.
Right, totally. I did.
So
I did.
Oxytocin is actually very, very good at rounding out emotions. Right? It makes you it makes the sharp edges of a situation get blunted or sewed off.
Is this why you can be in an argument with someone, and if you can get past it to the point where you can have a nice long hug, you both just feel so much better?
Yes, because it releases the oxytocin.
Even though the problem has not gone away?
Yes.
And you're like, wow, we're fine, at least, for the moment.
Yeah. Here's a really interesting story. It's an old one about oxytocin, but they actually did this. There were like venture capitalists who were given business plans, right? The business plans were actually identical, but they were just jumbled together, formatted differently, etc., and given to the same venture capitalists, right? So on one stack, we don't use paper anymore, so you can't do this trick anymore. One stack they sprayed with oxytocin, and the other stack they didn't, right? And the venture capitalists on the same proposal, they agreed 80%, on funding the company. So don't get any ideas, startup entrepreneurs.
No, I was already thinking about, okay, I need a spray bottle when I walk, before they come in the room, spritz the room with a bunch of oxytocin and then say, so can I borrow the money? That's interesting.
Yeah.
So no risk of down regulation.
Yeah, no risk. It was very low. And I use it also for autistic kids, right?
Really?
5? Yeah. They become very social. They hug. They don't like to hug, right? They don't like to hug. Give them. Like I give them 5 IU in the morning when they wake up, and then before their lunchtime meal, another 5 IU. They actually begin to hug.
And would these oxytocin troches be available commercially anywhere? Or is it a prescription thing?
It's a prescription.
Okay.
It's a prescription. But I'm just telling you the effects. Oxytocin is also a hormone of orgasm. So if you want to have one of the best orgasms of your life, take it 2 hours before.
Really?
Yeah, take it 2 hours before, and you'll have a fantastic orgasm. That's if your dopamine and serotonin levels are, are balanced.
Right. Okay, cool. Very, very good information. Now, in terms of downregulation, there's a couple other compounds that come to mind. Are you familiar with Jack Kruse, Dr. Jack
Yes.
Kruse? So I've had Jack on the show a number of times, and he's got some very strong opinions about many things. And
I invited him to speak in the Philippines, actually.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did.
And I'm on board with 99.9% of Jack's stuff because I try it and it works. He got me watching the sunrise. It changed my life.
Yeah, I couldn't get him to just simplify and clarify his writing.
Well, that's my job. That's my job. That's what I pride myself in, is taking people like you
but
Jack,
he loves me. So
one thing he's adamantly against on all basis, in all scenarios, is exogenous melatonin. Mm-hmm. And, he said it just absolutely destroys the body's ability to do it. And that's one thing I use for jet lag hacking. I don't take melatonin unless I know I'm going to sleep like shit, or I'm traveling and I'm trying to trick my circadian rhythm and I know that I'm not going to be able to produce it on my own. What's your view on regular use of melatonin? Are there downsides to that?
Actually, if you take a look at the normal production of melatonin, it declines with age. It's very high, right? 18, 19, 20. And the peak is actually quite pronounced. By 24 or 25 years old, it starts dropping down very, very acutely. And this is in normal people. Right? So for me, my point is, when you're already starting to get deficient in it, you should start supplementing. And the culprit, of course, is there's a calcification of your pineal gland, right? Increased calcification of your pineal gland as you get older.
And that's what stops the production of it?
Yes.
And do you think that the theory that fluoridation of the water contributes to the calcification of the pineal gland is valid?
Yes. My sister is an endodontist, right? And I asked her about this. He said, Ted, none of the fluoride is never expected to be swallowed.
Wow.
He said you should make sure that when you use a fluoridated toothpaste, that everything is actually spat out.
And you're aware that's been put in the water supply of the United States in many cities,
in many
if not
cities,
most
yes,
cities, for a long, long time, right?
Yeah. Long-term use of it can cause chalky teeth too.
Yeah, big swindle.
So, and that's why, and the downstream, one of the downstream metabolites of melatonin is dimethyltryptamine, right?
What?
Yes, of course. It's the same pathway right there. What? It's the natural production. DMT is highest when you dream, right? Is it when you dream?
We produce DMT when we're dreaming?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They say it's highest when you're born, at night when you dream, and when your life flashes before your eyes before you die. So better build a good database of good memories so that when it flashes,
right.
Your DMT trip will just go.
Oh my God, that's crazy, dude. Okay, so you're not against the idea of supplementing with melatonin as you age. What about, and this is...
They can measure melatonin now,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was a test called melatonin rhythm.
Oh, okay.
They can test it by your saliva and take a look at the melatonin.
What I learned from Jack is that whether it's produced in that moment or signaled to be produced later in the night, is that getting that early morning red light spectrum from the sun is what triggers your pineal gland to actually start producing melatonin later. Would you subscribe to that?
Yes, we're yoked to the sun. I love Jack for totally emphasizing that always. We are yoked to the sun. We have forgotten our relationship with environment. And one of the things that he really emphasized is light, water, and magnetism, right? That's his thing.
Right.
And for me, when you're meant to wake up with the sun hitting your skin. When the sun hits your skin, you start producing the stress hormone cortisol. You wake up, right? Your thyroid hormone also starts surging. That's why when you're hacking jet lag, you take thyroid hormone and hydrocortisone in the morning so that, you wake up. This is just mimicking the natural system of the body. We're not doing anything different. We're just copying. Right? And however, we have artificial lights now. We don't follow regular sunrise and sunset. So it's very difficult to do that. So the best way to do is to hack your lighting system and also hack your internal melatonin producing system. Right.
I want to totally do a funny rewind here. And before I forget, I want to go back to the beginning of where I wanted to start the conversation from a place of logic, because I just went on intuition, which was great. There's something that I know nothing, many things I know nothing about, but in relation to studying you and inviting you on the show, one thing that I found intriguing about you is that you have this purportedly phenomenally high IQ level. And I also found it interesting in listening to a lot of your work and studying what you do, that you're a man of deep humility. And I'm sure that because of that, it's not something you typically like to talk about or, God forbid, brag about, but give us the numbers of your IQ, because it's something you're kind of known for as being this really brilliant guy that's sort of been quantified through testing to be so. Because I don't know, like, if an 80 IQ means anything, 200, like, I have no point of reference for genius or beyond. So,
well, the point of IQ test is it measures how well you take IQ tests. that's it for me. I joke about it this way. It's like 210 on a bad day because I cannot understand anyone, and 186 on a good day because I can understand some people.
So 186 would be on the lower range and 210 on the higher range.
It fluctuates. But the meaning of that really is, if you look at it as hard values, it's not the proper way to look at it. You look at it in terms of the probability of occurrence, right? The probability of occurrence of that type of score in a test for me is 1 in a billion. Okay, so that's a better way of looking at it.
So your IQ on average humans that have taken such tests is 1 in a billion.
Yes.
And so that would mean there's about 8 human beings on the planet that have the IQ.
When I was measured, and I'm continuously measured, when I was measured, there were 4 of us, so there's now 8 of us.
Because the population's doubled since then?
Yeah,
Were you a kid or something? Is that...
I was 15 when I first measured, and I was first year in college.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing I find interesting about your exceptionally high IQ is that you have seem to have some experience in entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And there was, I don't know if it was a study or what kind of information it was, but I took this in at some point and I hung on to it, and now I can't find the point of reference, but there was an expose or a report or something on the highest IQ people on the planet, and this paper indicated that they all worked for someone else. They were all kind of bean counters, essentially, and that, the Steve Jobs of the world and all the truly innovative people that we think of as genius don't really have that high of IQs. And the theory there was that if someone has a too high of an IQ, they're able to calculate the risk of a venture, and they don't do it. They don't pull the trigger. Whereas you have these sort of like, these cavalier kind of, bright people that are very creative and innovative, but they're not smart enough to not pull the trigger because they don't care about the risk. So
that's a wonderful question, by the way. I teach this to all of my students also. I said is to have an evolutionary point of view. And what's the essence of an evolutionary point of view? You throw out as much shit that you can out there and see what takes, right? And so whatever survives, whatever project survives, the environment selects for it. Your capability to sustain the project and interest, etc., will keep it alive, will make it successful, and so on. So you can not just have one. You should have, several projects going. See what takes. It's like I actually traded currencies for a while using artificial intelligence models, and I was winning. But at the beginning of the week, I would have like 12 species that I call 12 artificial intelligence models that would start going, right? And they would compete with each other. Some would lose, etc. By Wednesday, I probably have, out of the 12, I probably have just 6 left because I kill them one by one, right? By Friday, you may have only one going and you're losing a lot of money, and then it makes this one that's known for. It makes the model goes this one major trade that you were not expecting it to make, and boom, you recover all of your money and then some. So, for me, that's the way the evolutionary perspective is a lot better than calculating the risk, because you cannot calculate for the risk of the environment. And
because it's spontaneous in its nature, right?
Yes. There are companies, for example, that do not survive just because they're in the wrong geography, right? They're not.
Oh my God! Yeah. I've observed this with retail, because I've lived in LA for 30 years, and I have a couple friends who have lived here for longer, and we observe there are certain, like, we call them energy vortexes.
Yes.
There's certain commercial plots here of land that no matter what they put there and how much money they sink into the building and what kind of marketing they do, they will always fail. There's just dead spots. They're like these vortexes of energy. Have you ever observed that, or
no,
does that
was in
relate
the
to what you're saying?
mathematics that I did. I wrote a book, right, on the what they now have a term for it. They call it connectome. Right? When I wrote it, it was a neural circuitry database. It's the wiring of the nervous system of a worm, right? And it was used by just 100 labs in the world in 1992, and then a lot of people are now reading it up because I found out that the field which we called connectionist systems in AI before is now called deep learning. So what marketing can do, right? Suddenly everyone's interested in the book over again. But anyway, during the time, and it's called connection systems. That's why I have this network perspective, right? In health, in what you were saying, there were models actually. Called neural network models that would model where you can put in a profitable business. You could put that in. You can model that in a landscape. You could see that there will be holes. That
really,
yeah.
Do you think that has anything to do with God? What's that word I'm looking for? It's part of an geopathic stressors. Cracks where that magnetic field comes up from the surface of the earth.
It could be from geopathic stressors. It could be from which may be underlying the Chinese practice of feng shui, right?
Right.
It could be from the fact that of the way it's not only geopathic stressors, but the way you structure the city or the location, such that you can calculate actually the number of one-way streets, where you can choke off a business. So if you want to choke off a business, you can say
that's hilarious.
Yeah, you can say, okay, this is now a one-way street, and that's not a one-way street, and you can see an area of the city.
Maybe
becoming
that's why
attractive.
it's taken downtown LA so many years to kind of come up to speed. It's been this kind of dead zone for all these years. Up until maybe 10 years ago, they started kind of building it out and gentrifying it. But there's a lot of one-way streets down there. Maybe that's been the problem.
Yeah, it's as I said. What can you fractalize? That's my term. What can you fractalize? You see the network? You can do that for streets. You can do that for health, right? For example, if you're taking too much zinc, for example, your copper will start going down because the body will start balancing it. It's in a network, right?
Right.
So I see this very often during the winter season or during the cold months when colds are very prevalent. People are sucking on cold ease and all of these zinc products, and their zinc levels just start rising, and you see their copper levels just start plummeting. So
that's funny because that's way further in my line of questioning
but
here.
Anyway, it's just showing you that these things are networked, right? If you when we were talking about hormones earlier, you cannot give cortisol without giving growth hormone. They're opposite. If you give cortisol, it will suppress growth hormone. If you give growth hormone, it suppress the cortisol. The way bodybuilders don't like cortisol, right? But they're weak as fuck. When they're on stage and stuff, they're really, really very tired because they can't handle stress anymore at the time.
On the top, I'm just going to jump in there now because you hit the point that I wanted to hit. Something I've just been sort of researching. A guy named Dr. Morley is a big expert in minerals, and his area of expertise specifically is dealing with iron toxicity. Mm-hmm. And this iron gets bound in our tissues, and for whatever reason, in the 1940s or 50s, we started putting freaking iron ore in all the cereals and breads and fortifying things with iron, and how that interferes with the copper in your body. And I can't begin to explain it, but in your practice, do you look at the iron toxicity, and are you like?
I do.
Is that part of your?
Iron is one of those difficult things to manage because iron in the intestines, for example, we have a fixed amount of receptors for iron. If you take any more, you're just going to poop it out, right? So if you notice, if you take too much iron supplement, your poop is going to be black, right? And that's too much of an iron supplement. But even the any condition in the intestine that will absorb its affect its absorption. Like for example, there's a competing mineral that the transporter will use, right? That will use a transporter rather, whether or not you have dysbiosis and you have leaky gut. All of this will influence the absorption of iron. But you can generalize that more actually to other minerals as well, right? It is not just iron. they have their own transporters, they have their own mechanisms of being absorbed, and they have their own positions within the cell. And the reason why iron is very important to us, of course, is that it forms the iron sulfur clusters in the mitochondria, right? And they are in our hemoglobin and so on and so forth. But generally, we do not lose iron unless we bleed. That's why women who are menstruating, for example, would need it, right? Because they get anemic because of that. But in general, we can absorb iron from food, right? It's just a matter of being able to take a look at or separating what kinds of diets are actually bad for when you're taking iron. But iron is generally in like bitter leaves, right? Moringa, for example, would have a lot of iron. It tastes very bitter.
What I'm getting at is kind of the flip side of the coin, and that is that we have too much iron. And so, one of the best recommendations for that for men, as you said, because we don't lose blood, is to go donate blood. As you get up over 30, to donate blood 4 times a year to get rid of excess iron, so that then the iron that is coming in environmentally is more balanced. Have you heard of that, or is this an issue at all?
From my practice, which has been a long time, iron toxicity is extremely rare.
Okay.
Right? I would rather focus on your mercury toxicity and your cadmium toxicity than focus on your iron toxicity.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
It's a very rare occurrence.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And
as someone who's had high mercury and lead, really high lead, which I've done a lot to get down.
And I had a case, a physician who actually ate a lot of canned goods, even if tin is already banned from canned goods. His tin was way off because he was eating canned goods every day.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So in your, this is another thing I kind of wanted to come at from the beginning, and because there's so many crazy things I want to get to here. And you've done interviews where you lay all this out in much more detail, and I encourage people to find them. And we could do other interviews where we do it, but give us a little bit of your journey through, what you might call illness medicine and the overview that you have versus kind of illness, functional medicine, and then the area that you're taking it into, which seems to me a bit more of a global, comprehensive way of looking at it. And I really think your perspective is interesting. And if there's a way that you can kind of summarize it briefly, because I don't want to miss that piece, but there are so many other things I want to get to too.
Okay. When I was looking at the new sciences that were coming out, like the sciences of mitochondria, the microbiota, the exposomics, which is a study of toxicities, right? Or your exposure to toxicities, both inside and outside. Chronobiology, that's a popular term nowadays. Evolutionary medicine, which just started out in 1990. Epigenetics, which people have heard about. And then now metabolomics. How do I put this all in clinical practice? And I found out that, in illness medicine, you diagnose and treat diseases. So I said, so what if we had a specialty that just detected and corrected imbalances without addressing the diseases, right? Just to keep the healthy cell healthy, right? And then I realized that there's actually a spectrum. Before everyone knows this, before you get into disease, you get into borderline deficiencies and subtle toxicities before you actually get the pathology or the disease itself. But technology did not have that a form of measuring before, right? They could only measure once the disease has occurred.
Is this why we got set off on the path of allopathic, or as you say, disease medicine, where symptom erupts, find a drug or a surgery to get rid of the symptom and then move on?
Yes.
It's kind of like,
actually,
or is that because it's so much easier to monetize that because the system keeps people within the system and you can keep sort of milking cash out of them and their insurance companies?
I mean, chronic diseases is a big source of money, right?
Right.
In medical school, essentially what we're learning is really very simple. Anatomy, which is a structure, physiology, which is a function, right? And then we go to pathology, which is diseases, right? And then from pathology, learn pharmacology, which is drugs, and surgery. So that's what we do all the time. Anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology surgery. That's our mantra. You go to the heart, you go to the liver, you go to the brain. It's the same thing. Structure, function, disease, drugs, surgery. However, it's like we were talking about this beforehand. The metaphor I'd like to use is the one for cars, right? When you go to your illness medicine doctor, you already have a flat tire, and the doctor either patches your flat tire or removes your tire your tire entirely, and that's called a transplant, right?
Right. Right. Okay. Good.
You patch it, and that's called graft, coronary artery bypass graft. That's patching, right? So that's how we know how to deal with a tire. When you come in with an overheated engine, that's like a fever, right? You go and test the blood for, hey, this is Klebsiella pneumonia, or this is Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and you can give antibiotics, to the patient. But that's the extent of what we really do. We fuck up at chronic diseases, right? And that's because we were never taught how to maintain a car. Right? So we go right into disease without knowing, okay, how to maintain a car. Our cars are luckier because they have sensors in there that says it's 3,000 miles. Time for you to, to bring your car to the garage, right? And so, and that for me is the origin. That for me is the origin of health optimization medicine, which I pioneered 10 years ago. Health optimization medicine is for doctors. Health optimization practice is for non-doctors. And what we do is simply to detect and correct imbalances at the level of the metabolome. Now, this was not easy to come by. Clinical metabolomics is about 40 years old as a science, but it's only come to the clinics recently. You measure all of these metabolites inside the cell. Now, I cannot fault illness medicine entirely for not looking at this because the tests were not available then. Right? Now the technology is available. Hell, we used to just memorize all the metabolites of the Krebs cycle, right? And now it's like, shit, Dr. Ted is measuring all of them. And you go, I have to go back to my basic biochemistry. But now that we have the technology, why don't we begin health here? Right? Why don't we see where we are having imbalances in before it goes into full-blown disease? And that's the practice of health optimization medicine. It's the maintenance part of the car.
And what's the difference between that and, the best of the functional medicine approach,
Yes.
where you go, you get all your Genova labs
Yes.
done, you test
Yes.
the urine, the hair,
Yes.
the blood, and
Thank you
the
for
poop.
saying that.
And and you look at it and you go, oh, you're deficient in this, supplement that. And then, that is kind of like a root cause approach, which I think is much better than the old system that you just
Right.
described.
However, okay, the big thing is that they still deal with disease. We don't. When you come to us, we set aside your diseases. We only take a look at your subtle toxicities and borderline deficiencies and move those. Whatever happens to you that's good is what I call a beneficial side effect. And therefore, we have no claims. A lot of patients come to me and say, Dr. Ted, why don't you claim that you're able to reverse diabetes and this and that? I said, because we have no claims. All I did was just balance out your levels of nutrients and hormones to the level when you were between 21 and 30, and balance properly. All of these other things disappear. You sleep better. You have a lot more energy, which is a very common complaint, right? Having a low battery. You relate better. In fact, one of the best stories that I have about it is, as my car was driving away, I saw the driver of a client of mine actually running towards the car. So I asked my driver to stop, and I rolled on the window, and he said, Dr. Ted, whatever it is that you're doing to the boss, can you please continue doing it? And I asked him, why? Well, she's been so nice for the past 6 months since she started handing her. She's very cordial to her employees. She doesn't yell anymore. At meetings, she's very, she's very calm. She doesn't walk out anymore, and so on. So I said, well, this is the best testament for me to continue doing what I'm doing, right? I make no claims, right? But it changes your relationships. Yeah, as a CEO, for example, you make better decisions for yourself, for your family, and your company. You know, so doing that is the trickle down effect that you see if you work with these kinds of people, especially those with a lot of power, a lot of wealth that can be used for greater good, right? And then you make them feel better, and everything gets better. Right? I've tried to work on the grassroots. It doesn't work as well.
Right.
Again,
Yeah.
I'm network based. You know,
Yeah.
which one is the Google, the Amazon, and the of all these nodes, and you try to get to them so that they make the world a better place by feeling better.
Sure. Sometimes that's the reason too that I try to get some noteworthy people on the podcast, and sometimes I'll put that out there, and listeners are like, "We don't care about famous people," and I don't care about famous people either. I worked in Hollywood for 17 years. I could give a fuck about famous people. Most of them are a royal pain in the ass. No offense, but it's just the truth. If it's not them, it's their publicist. But I also recognize that they have such an influence, you know. So you have a Kim Kardashian, if she starts coming out talking about, the fact that even just like, hey, don't chew aspartame gum. Like just someone at that level just saying that could affect generations of people downstream. Just one little thing. And so imagine if you get someone with influence that has even more knowledge and you help them spread that knowledge through alternative media like we are. So I think of that same kind of systems way too in terms of the sphere of influence rather than, trying to get everyone out working in the field. Let's get the guy who owns the field to change their mindset, and they're going to start, paying all the workers, feeding all the workers, and it's going to have that trickle down effect, which is it's just so true because you can see how it works.
Yeah, for those people, I actually have a funny comeback when I'm supposed to know someone and I don't know him or her. It's supposed to be, this very rich person and so on. And I go, what charity does he donate to again? If I don't recognize, I say, no charity. Oh, okay, not worth knowing.
That's funny, dude. I'm going to jump back to the nootropics thing real quick because then I want to get into the psychedelics a little bit. I have so many questions. I'm looking at my clock. I'm like, okay, I got 1 hour. So one that I wanted to ask about was another one that I use, in a very targeted way, but I don't know if I could live without it for certain things like travel. And just if I happen to have a really crappy night of sleep and I have to perform at a high level, it just fixes me, and that's modafinil. What might you have to say about
I love
that?
modafinil.
You do?
Oh, I do. Except that modafinil raises your blood pressure, so you have to be careful about that. The modafinil, actually, I only take a quarter tab.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, because I'm the one who experiences all of its side effects. I'm the unlucky one that experiences all the side effects. Right. Sore throat, dry mouth, and all of these other things that you say, this will never happen to me on a 1/4 tab, and it does. Right? But it does raise your blood pressure, so you don't use it for hypertensive people.
Would you say that would be a reason to not take it during air travel?
No, when you land is when you want to take it. You don't
take it on the plane.
No.
Bad idea.
Bad idea.
What about taking paracetam on the plane?
That's fine.
Doesn't paracetam help bring oxygen to the brain?
Yes, but you know
that was my theory. Like, well, if there's a low oxygen environment, how can I get more oxygen to the brain? I'll take paracetam.
Let me disclose a hack that I've never disclosed anywhere before.
Yes, I love it.
I actually microdose EPO.
What's that?
Erythropoietin. It's a hormone that makes your body produce more red blood cells. But I use it in very, very small doses. It's the one that Lance Armstrong got busted for.
Really?
Right?
Do you need to be a doctor to get this too?
Yes.
You have all I'm going to med school. God damn it. You have all the cool stuff.
But this is the first time that I've seen anyone actually do that kind of microdosing because I use a very, very low dose, like only 400 IU a day. That's 40 IU a day. And that's
while traveling.
While traveling. Yes.
For flying.
Yeah, for flying.
Okay.
I use it a month before extensive travel.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
I use it months before extensive travel. But since I've been traveling extensively for several years, I started doing this about 3 years ago. So I've been doing it for 3 years now. every
Wow.
day. Yeah.
So modafinil has some side effects, but the interesting thing about it, because it does feel kind of stimulating, what I imagine Adderall might feel like. But the weird thing about modafinil, for me at least, having a history of being someone that's very easily addicted to things, even if I don't like them, if they're habit forming, I will form a habit and just hate the habit, but keep doing it. I mean, it's been a long time. So I was a little scared because it is a pharmaceutical. The weird thing about modafinil, I can't, if I tried to become addicted to it, I couldn't. I forget to take it for a few weeks, maybe a couple months, and I go, oh, damn, I could have had a modafinil.
There's a supplement also form. You don't need to have a prescription. It's adrafinil. Adrafinil, the liver will actually cleave it to form modafinil.
Oh, interesting.
And then it will have the same effects. So if you don't want a sudden effect of modafinil when you have it, just have adrafinil. The body will actually convert it to modafinil, and you have the same effect.
Why do you think it's not addictive? It's not. I know it's not an amphetamine, and amphetamines are addictive for some people more than others, but it's it makes you not tired, but it doesn't make you wired like some sort of methamphetamine would. It's really weird. Do you happen to know why why you can't really get addicted to it, even though it is somewhat mood altering in a mild way?
The way I reading about the materials, we don't really know how it works, right? It's called a eugeroic, right? Eugeroic means it makes you feel good, but the mechanisms of action is actually not known. But looking at the way it acts, I think the reason why it's not that addictive is that it has a more balanced release of dopamine and serotonin together.
Oh,
right?
okay.
If it were pure dopamine like Adderall does, then you will really get addicted to it.
Right.
Because dopamine-inducing the rush is are highly addictive.
Just like Instagram. And pornography.
Pornography raises your dopamine, right?
Yeah, that's why I quit that shit. It's horrible. 2 years ago, I said, I've had it. I'm done. I want natural dopamine. Okay, that's interesting. And the other one I wanted to ask you about is Phenibut. Are you familiar with that one?
I just took it actually a few nights ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for sleep. Yes, that's addicting.
Yeah. And I've noticed if I do Phenibut too often, I get weird headaches and kind of vertigo feeling. I've been turned off to it a few times because I think I took too much. And that one is even more risky, I think, in terms of negative side effects than modafinil or the racetams or any of that. If you mess with Phenibut too much, it can screw you up, right?
Yeah, I don't take it. I probably take it only once in a month, or because I don't like the Phenibut head. When you wake up in the morning and you're groggy, right? And even worse is the Phenibut boner. You don't have any, right? So you wake up with nothing.
It's inverted. It's turned into a vagina.
If you're, for example, wanting to just use it once because you're jet lagged and you want to sleep, and you have the next day free, that you can sleep for a long time,
right?
Because it tends to prolong your sleep, right?
What I like Phenibut for is, and maybe this is because I don't drink alcohol, but I find it to be a really good social lubricant.
Low doses.
Yeah. Phenibut, I don't know. I'm talkative and friendly and able to socialize a bit easier. It sort of removes a bit of the social anxiety. Not unlike one glass of wine, one drink. Not, I don't feel drunk at all, but similar sort of GABA, relaxed, social feeling.
Yeah, or you could also take 200 milligrams of magic mushrooms and it will do the same thing.
On the psilocybin, because we talked about this earlier, and this is, I'm fascinated by microdosing because for so many years I just didn't touch anything. Just because those were my rules. And now I experiment a bit more. And I was telling you the story of how when I first started microdosing psilocybin or magic mushrooms, I got, I was very paranoid. I didn't want to get high. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted better brain function, etc. So I actually met a guy on the side of the freeway. He did the handoff. It was very much a drug deal. It came in a plastic baggie, and I got a digital scale, and I measured a few caps and a few stems, and I'm okay, 0.2 of a gram is the recommended dose. I'm sticking to that. I'm not going to mess around. And so I kind of eyeballed what it was, and then I used the scale for a while, and eventually I kind of know the weight. And so, I just take one stem and one little cap in the morning with my coffee. And one time I did that at a Tony Robbins event in San Jose, and I must have picked a cap that had a lot psilocybin in it because I wasn't, tripping, but I just felt uncomfortable in a stadium of 12,000 people. I walked in and heard that horrific music. God bless Tony Robbins, but he does play some horrific music. And I felt like I was like at a Motley Crue concert in 1984 again, when I used to take psychedelics in the wrong situation.
It's difficult to tell the quality of the...
Well, so what I did, and I want to see if I screwed them up or if I'm still getting an effect, is I got an ounce of mushrooms next time, like a much bigger batch so it would last me. And I put them in my coffee grinder and I made a powder out of it. And then I weighed a little scooper to get exactly a standardized dose of 0.2 of a gram so that the variant of psilocybin in each part of each little mushroom would just be unified, right? But you said something earlier, I think, about the potency of psilocybin
decreases.
Degrading.
Yes.
Degrades over time.
Over time, yes.
So my method might suck then, huh? The coffee grinder and then put them in the refrigerator?
Yeah, and if you put them in the refrigerator for storage, in fact, you should vacuum seal it. Right?
Okay.
You even vacuum seal it, and even then the potency still decreases.
Really? So it's better to buy a smaller batch less frequently.
Yes.
But then again, you don't know how long they've been sitting around whatever hippie
That's why you need
basement.
to grow your own. It's legal.
Is it really?
It's legal to grow your own. You can buy the spores on
Are you
Amazon.
serious?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it hard to grow them?
No.
Because I have a decent green thumb, as you may have guessed. I've got multiple plants in the house.
Now you need to get a decent white thumb because it's a fungus.
Well, the other thing that concerns me about mushrooms is they often appear to be moldy. This blue stuff on them, is that mold?
Yes, it looks. If it's growing on them. Then
because when you grow them in a lab, they don't have those little blue streaks and stuff. God damn it!
Because they're also like. When you're growing them, there are also spores in the air from whatever, and they could land on them.
Okay. Especially if it's on a piece of cow shit.
Yeah.
In a field in Oregon.
By the way, did you hear that podcast that was done by Fadiman himself on microdosing?
No.
He said he basically narrated the story of how the dosing solidified into, it's 0.2 to 0.5 grams of mushrooms, would be the microdose, and he actually told the story. He never said any such thing. What he did was he was advising people, why don't you try this? 200 milligrams and why don't you try increasing it to 500 milligrams? And and then suddenly he was surprised that people saying, okay, it's 1/10 of the tripping dose, it's 200. It's suddenly it became like this rule. But when I heard him in his podcast, I think it's a psychedelic salon or something like that. When I heard him in the podcast, I said, "Oh my God, here's one who is considered as the father of microdosing, this LSD and mushrooms and whatnot." His work or his words were actually just congealed into some rule
that now everyone follows.
Everyone follows. I found it hilarious.
I'm sure he did too. Or horrifying. Like, what if he had given a much larger dose and just everyone's tripping balls, thinking, "Wow, he's right. I feel amazing." Okay, and in terms of the mechanism of action of psilocybin, what's that doing for us in terms of cognitive ability, memory enhancement, vision? How does it affect the brain?
They affect certain receptors of the brain, right? They affect certain receptors of the brain that allow you to form novel connections among things, right? And usually those connections have some empathogenic quality to them, right? So when you're activating those receptors are also activating other portions of the brain which have not been there before. So it's a novel connection, right? And it usually is a pathogenic connection, meaning it's something to do with feeling. That's why mushrooms are usually associated with, very good feeling states, right? However, try taking mushroom when you're angry. It will just amplify the anger.
Right. That's the terror of psychedelics is the always potential bad trip of things not going your way. The set and setting are not well planned, or things erupt that you didn't expect, and then you're like, oh shit, I'm stuck on this, which is why psychedelics are so terrifying from one perspective if you're not really careful. And that's one of the reasons I don't just blanket recommend them to everyone, because it can go horribly wrong also.
Yes. For me, it's like, before you even take psychedelics, make sure you're healthy. Don't even try them if you have any brain fog, any of these other things, hoping that they will cure you of them, because it won't. It won't. Because, for example, right now they're using MDMA, right, for post-traumatic stress disorder. This is been studied to be used by therapists, their patients. And what MDMA does is it separates the informational content. Say I was raped, for example, it separates the information that I was raped versus the feelings that come out of it.
Whoa.
Right? So, and that's the effect of MDMA. So you are able to go out and say I was raped without feeling that entire emotional thing. So with post-traumatic stress disorders, in wars, for example, the person can see, okay, I shot this kid, like in the American Sniper, right? I shot this kid. There's that information, I shot this kid, minus the whole gamut of emotions that go with it. And that's a basis of therapy, right? Mm-hmm. So however, if you take MDMA as a drug itself, as a party drug, for example, or at
a rave,
or for your own therapy, it will actually induce your brain to produce so much serotonin, right? You will have to have you get a very large serotonin pulse, and that's abnormal, right? But it's good for your therapy for the time, but the next day you should know how to protect yourself. You should know how to take, right after taking it, before you go to sleep, you have to take your 5-HTP, make sure that you replenish your tryptophan levels and have a high tryptophan diet the next day. Because this is what these drugs do, right? They put certain neurotransmitters in your brain on overdrive, right? And if your brain is not healthy to take that, it will hurt you.
That's just kind of seems plainly potentially bad.
Yes. And,
right? I mean, because you're instigating an imbalance.
Yes.
Which could go one way or the other depending on all of these other circumstances.
Yeah,
right?
in clinical metabolomics, for example, there's a testing for neurotransmitter metabolites, right? You could see immediately the metabolites of dopamine, of serotonin, of norepinephrine go in there. So you could take a look at one person. It's like, why is this athlete unable to focus? And you could see the dopamine levels are way down. Right? Or why is this woman depressed? And you could see she's overusing her serotonin. She's trying to cope, but she couldn't. Right? And there are many, you could see the profiles of this thing. Why is there no wake? Why do I always feel sleepy? And you see your norepinephrine levels are actually down. You could balance this stuff. Best thing is you can balance them naturally. With just the right amount of amino acids if your enzyme system is still functioning properly. When you're young, your enzymatic system is still functioning properly, right? But when you're older, it doesn't do that as much anymore. That's why, for example, there's this big debate, right? We took out T3 or the triiodothyronine hormone out of the market because we said that T4 will convert to T3 and therefore that will be the one that will be sold only. But then what people didn't realize is that as you get older, that enzyme that removes one iodine from T4 to make it T3 and make it active iodine also decreases in activity. So there's a lot that's going on when you're taking these substances, right? Your age, the situation of your health, more importantly, the situation of your intracellular health. What's going on inside there? they should be at optimal levels. Now that it's possible to do that, why don't you take a measurement first before you start using before you start optimizing any performance? Optimize your health first. Because then that even if you push your brain to overdrive, like, my brain is producing so much serotonin on this E that I've taken, that it will recover quickly.
Right.
Rather than if your brain isn't.
Right. So this is where it comes down to the very specific testing of neurotransmitters, hormones, toxic load, heavy metals, gut biome, all that. Creating balance there, having a good base level.
Yeah, that's done by clinical metabolomics.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Moving on to the next thing I'm very curious about, as you and your cohort, Roland, showed up here today, and we started having a chat, and I think the topic of psychedelics or microdosing came up, and you're like, oh, well, today's Monday, so today was my LSD microdose. I thought, this is going to be a great podcast. One thing that's interesting to me about the LSD microdosing versus psilocybin. I think I just started with psilocybin because it was more readily available and it seemed easier to control the dose.
Yeah.
Just from a fundamental level, how the hell can you measure the dose of LSD? Because I'm coming from the old days of Grateful Dead concerts where you have a little paper tab and you could cut it in 4 parts and try to kind of microdose just to get a little buzz. But like your buddy might have gotten the part of the tab with more liquid on it. You know what I mean? And you're like, I'm not feeling anything. And your buddy's tripping balls over in the corner. Yeah. So how can you accurately measure LSD to microdose?
What you do is first you need to have a reputable supplier of, say, 1P LSD.
Okay.
Because that's legal, right?
Oh, okay. It's legal where?
It's legal anywhere.
Really?
1P LSD, yes. LSD isn't, but 1P LSD is.
Really? What's the difference?
It's just the 1P.
I mean, is it just a different molecule? Or?
It's just an addition to the molecule.
Oh, okay.
But it has the same effects.
If it's legal, where could one get it?
There's a.
I don't want your guy, but
if you just type in the Google 1P LSD buy, you will see it.
Really?
It's a website. Yes.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so how does one accurately microdose? Because I mean, with LSD, that's not something you want to like. Oops, took 4 hits by accident.
That actually knows how to measure it accurately. Your supply.
Got it.
Your supply is 100 micrograms, and then you have a diluent, the liquid that you use to dilute it with. That you can actually use a syringe or something to gauge the number of ml of diluent that you have, and then you could say it's 100 micrograms. Every 10 will be every line, for example, of 100 of a 1 cc syringe or 1 ml syringe, every line would be 10, right?
Got it. I think that's kind of what I do with peptides. I recently started shooting up peptides. Just why not?
No, I mean, I mean, every line would be 1 microgram.
Got it. Yeah, but it takes a little bit of math. Because even when I was trying to figure out the peptides, I'm like, wait, 15? What? I thought I think I got it right. See if I freak out. So definitely not for the the novice with the LSD there.
If your source must deliver it to you accurately weighed.
Right.
Otherwise, there's no way that you could.
Yeah, and that's, you don't want to like go to the office that day and be like, whoops, the carpet's moving. Man, not the desired effect today.
And you actually, when I'm in it, I usually just stay with a small group of people. I don't like, large crowds, etc. Because you become a little bit more empathetic. Like you feel the energy of people.
Pick up energies. Scientifically, what's happening to your brain when you're taking LSD, a microdose of LSD?
The nice thing about that is that this has been studied, right, by Robin Carter at Harris, is they found that it actually dampens the default mode network of the brain. Again, this is another network, which is the seat of the ego. Okay?
What?
So you get an ego dampening effect.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
So you could say LSD is like exogenous humility.
Yes. Something like that. And you're also, I find myself with actually a lot of creative solutions.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Creative solutions, a lot of things that you're looking at solutions for outside the box all of the time, and you're looking for the way to actually implement them. And it's when a microdose when I actually am able to think about, okay, this is the bridge that actually forms there. So the connection becomes clearer to me. As you said, exogenous humility is actually very funny because my mom died a couple of years ago. And of course, brothers and sisters were all like in a table, and we were all fighting one way or the other and how to fix the problems, etc., etc. We had a very, let's just say it was a very bad first meeting. So the next time around, there was another meeting, so I dosed all of them. 20 minutes later, everyone was amenable to the solution.
Are you serious?
So, yeah.
Knowingly?
Yeah.
Did they know?
No, I didn't. They knew.
Oh, okay. That was
Yeah.
borderline unethical, if not. But if it worked, hey.
Yeah, but there was a camera in front of them too. Like, what you're saying here is binding.
That's funny. Oh man, that's hilarious. Okay, God, so fascinating. Let me check the time here because I know you have a flight at some point. Okay, we're good. Because I'm just having way too much fun. I knew this was going to be a good one, but it's better than I thought. This is so fun. Okay, ayahuasca.
Yes, sir.
You explained something to me earlier that you've actually created your own version of DMT, which you're calling pharmacologist.
Yes.
Take us down this rabbit hole because the recent ayahuasca experience I had was freaking amazing. When the time is right, I think it's something I would definitely do very intentionally again. But one thing I definitely did not like about it was the sort of wasted energy of battling the nausea. I didn't vomit. My 4 ceremonies, thankfully, I didn't, purge. The 4th day I did purge out the other side considerably, which was not pleasant at all, but just distracting, like when you're laying there on your mattress and you're having some beautiful realization or experience, and then it's like, oh God, I think I have to switch to the other side or I might throw up. It's just like, I don't even want to spend that much energy. Now, purist of the traditions would be like, oh, that's part of it. The plant knows, like you have to work through this. But I felt like I could have had the same experience without feeling nauseous. And you said you felt the same, and you cracked the code. So what is it?
No, let's go first things first. The baseline is that I hate suffering.
Okay.
I am one of those people who don't like to suffer. As I told you earlier, if you believe that you have to work hard for your money, then work hard for your money. It's the same thing. If you believe that you have to suffer for enlightenment, then go ahead and do that. Right? But what I'm after is 1 cent solutions. I'm sure you've heard of the Guru and the Buddha, right? Walking by Enlightenment River. Have you heard this?
I don't think so.
So the Buddha and the Guru were walking at the bank of Enlightenment River, and at the middle of Enlightenment River was Enlightenment Island. And the Guru said to the Buddha, Buddha, I studied for 30 years at Levitation Island, and now I can just walk on water and reach Enlightenment Island. The Buddha said, my God, 30 years, that's so difficult. Said, why did you do that? The ferry to Enlightenment Island costs only 1 cent. So
Right.
I am after 1 cent solutions, and I think ayahuasca is a 1 cent solution to enlightenment. So, and then when I saw that the active ingredient is dimethyltryptamine, which occurs naturally in the brain, I said, okay, time for me to put my pharmacological training in this. So the initial ones that I worked on was using the traditional liver inhibitor called the Harmala, and
So this is the other. There's 2 vines.
yeah, 2 vines,
right?
Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotra viridis. Banisteriopsis caapi is the vine, and it inhibits the liver. It's an irreversible MAOI inhibitor, right? So, and that is responsible for all of the vomiting. And that's why you go into a dieta, 2 weeks before and so on and so forth, so that you're actually removing tyramine from your food. Okay, so cheeses and other tyramine-rich foods are forbidden, right? Because of that, it's an MAOI inhibitor that is irreversible. So, and the other one, Psychotra viridis, contains DMT itself. Then they put it together.
So
right?
if you just boiled up a bunch of the vine without the inhibitor, nothing would happen psychoactively.
No, actually, interestingly, the vine, because it's an MAO inhibitor, so MAO inhibitor means that all, like the dopamine, for example, in the brain, the catecholamines in the brain will not be degraded as rapidly if you take the vine. So it by itself, it has an effect. All right, it has an effect. It just doesn't have the dimethyltryptamine.
Ah,
Right?
okay.
Yes. Dimethyltryptamine, you can find Psychotroph viridis. It's in the root bark of acacia trees, where usually you can buy from Amazon, right?
Oh, a friend of mine's like, hey, I got a DMT vape pen. It's made from bark. If you want to
Yes,
come over and
that's
trip
acacia.
balls, I was like, what?
Acacia root bark. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
Interesting.
so what I did was I actually found a drug, which is an antidepressant, that's the world's only reversible MAO inhibitor. Okay, so which means that even if you eat, it will not cause you to vomit. So that plus some DMT crystals, will give you a journey of about 4 to 5 hours. So you give the liver inhibitor first, and then after the liver is sufficiently inhibited, then you start giving the measured DMT capsules, right? And in a particular protocol, in a particular protocol. For myself, I started really because I did this for myself. So I started really doing this with very small doses, like 50 milligrams every 30 minutes, and only for 100 milligrams total, that's the starting dose.
And where
then,
do these crystals originate? Are they a pharmaceutical?
No, you extract them from your own kitchen. You can
Oh,
buy
wow.
them. They're illegal, right?
Wow.
These are
They're illegal or
They're
legal?
illegal.
Oh,
They're
okay.
Schedule 1 substance.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
see. Okay.
They're Schedule 1 substance.
Okay.
And I said, my joke is that everyone should be hauled to jail because we're harboring a Schedule 1 substance in our brain, right?
Right.
It's kind of funny.
Right.
But it's there are many references out there on how to extract, to purify, and so on.
So is
Yeah.
there something about your process that's proprietary that you figured out that other people haven't?
No.
Oh, okay.
The only thing that I figured out there was what type of liver inhibitor to use.
Ah, I
Yeah.
see. Okay.
Yes, and
So-
everything is actually in capsules.
I see.
So there's no more plant material, there's nothing. But the nice thing about it is that you don't get into nausea, you don't get into the vomiting, you don't get into diarrhea and whatever. And as we were talking earlier, a friend of mine described the journey as seeing everything in HD TV rather than seeing it as a broken TV. So that's the kind of experience that I have gotten from it. In terms of ayahuasca means work. I want to be able to work my issues
Right.
in there.
Right.
Right. So, and for me, it's a more gentle form of introduction, of a more gentle ride to Enlightenment Island, rather rather than trying to levitate and near drowning quite a few times before you reach it.
It's funny because one of my very mild concerns was, wow, if I really enjoy ayahuasca, I could have the propensity to want to do it more often for the wrong reasons, just to have fun and escape my problems rather than facing them, which is what I did. But because of the nausea, it's like I left there kind of going, I would like to do this again because of the insights and the things that I was able to heal, or that the plant or God or whatever healed for me. So I want more healing, but I'm like, oh God, I don't want to lay on that mat feeling sick,
Yes.
And so that was kind of a safeguard for me, because there's no way I would do ayahuasca recreationally because of the suffering involved, But when you tell me you still trip balls and you have all these great visuals and these, this healing transformation takes place without the sickness, I could see myself going, cool, I'll do that tonight. Let's go. Let's do it every night.
Actually, I still am afraid.
Really?
I've taken it a lot of times, the things I've done, and I still have this awe and a slight fear. In fact, a large amount of fear of the substance, because it transforms you, it changes you.
It does.
Right? And you have to be ready to accept those changes. no matter how much you cry about the changes, someone's being pulled out of your life, someone's being shoved into your life, and so on. You just have to surrender. That's what it does.
Yeah. I think that was the big takeaway for me was surrender. And the more I was able to surrender into the experience, the deeper the experience got and the more power it had, like the more transformation took place, the less resistance I had, which is of course counterintuitive because you think, I want to control the situation to get what I want, the desired outcome. Whereas with the plant medicine, in my experience, it was like the more you let go, the more it guides you where it feels it needs to go. And ultimately that serves the highest good for your evolution.
Yeah. It's the main lesson, right? It's, people call it ego death. I call it pushing away the ego, or piercing through the veil of what they call in Hindu philosophy, pierce through the veil of illusion, and you see what's really there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
See, that was what was the weirdest thing for me was having not been intoxicated for so long at the point at which I did ayahuasca, as it started to come on. I mean, and I always am honest about this. It was super fun. I was like, this is amazing. I'm high as shit. That was my first thought. It was just like, whoa, yes. I always liked this feeling, it's a familiar territory for me. But at the same time, I felt extremely sober because the addictive thoughts and all the thought patterns and even the body and the ego personality and what people think or what I think of them, all the opinions, all the shit was sort of pushed to the side. And there I was just in complete pure consciousness, which I think is about as sober as you can get.
Yes.
Because when you're so encumbered by the personality and the thoughts and all the things that make us the human meat suit kind of person that we are, when all that is sort of pushed aside, as you said, that veil is pierced or lifted, you're in a place of the utmost sobriety. It's the strangest paradox, I think, that I've experienced in that way. And I think there's so much more work to be done on that level. I want to know, in your experience, did you ever have anything with the pharmacologist where I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy, but I am kind of crazy, so I'm just going to say it. But it was as if there was a visitation happening, and it was very kind of ET-like, but no little green men. It was very mechanistic, very like the visuals were very mechanical. Things were like click, click, click. Everything was right angles. There was no organic matter at all. It was all like geometric lights, but it wasn't like a video game because there was a consciousness behind it, and it knew what to do to me and for me and with me, and I was kind of communicating with it in a nonverbal feeling way, and it was doing this sort of very mechanical adjustment on my body, on my psyche, and then at a certain point, the different things happen different nights. Those of you listening, I did a 3-part series podcast, a trilogy called Welcome to the Jungle, my ayahuasca experience at Rhythmia. So if you want more, go back and listen to that. But at various times, aside from just that sort of ET visitation kind of grid spaceship abduction type thing that was going on, there was also an involuntary multiple journeys into traumas that I had experienced, and a almost a re-feeling of them, a re-experience of them, but in a positive way that was not scary or harmful in any way, but a healing, because it allowed me to see the true depth and impact of some of those traumas that I think psychologically, cognitively, I've worked on, I've dealt with, I've talked about it, I've had therapy, I've done all the things. But the medicine in its intelligence or whatever is behind that said, yeah, you've taken a look at this, but watch this. Boom.
Yes.
And it was just like, oh my God, I got so fucked up as a kid. I mean, that's really what it was. Yeah. I was like, I had no idea that I was so hurt.
Yeah.
And it's not a victim thing. It's a admission of reality. I was really, really badly hurt and traumatized. And then I could see the lineage of that as it's colored my whole adult life up to 48 years old. And within the stark reality of that, I think, is where the healing was. So I know I said it was a question. Maybe I'm just kind of sharing with you, but what do you think is behind that kind of ET visitation thing. And do you know what I'm talking about? Did you have anything like that?
But for me, it's like this. Yours is more discrete, right? Mine it's a swirl of this geometric and then almost robotic-like beings, and they swirl around and swirl around, and one of them would face you. Right. and then you get this flashback, from some event in childhood, and then they will go again, and then another one will come out and then just face you. But my more interesting, why I was a very strict neuroscientist. I was in a lab for several years and so on. The experience that actually convinced me of the power of ayahuasca was that two of us went on a journey by the beach, right? By the beach, and then, true enough, the sky. You see the fractal, the sky fold into fractal universe, and everything. The clouds became angel wings, and then looking over, you could see the steps over the ocean, right? And I was describing this scene, these steps over the ocean, and so on, and he started describing the same thing. So we were sharing the quote-unquote hallucination. We were seeing the same thing, and we were not communicating other than with the molecule itself. And then I read further that the molecule used to be called telepathine.
Whoa.
That was the original name.
Wow.
Yeah. So that for me is like, it's right, like getting a rug pulled out from under you. It's like, why the fuck are we seeing the same thing?
That's trippy.
Yeah.
That's very trippy. Another thing about it that was apparent to me was that, I don't know if it was apparent, but I'm kind of just stabbing in the dark, hoping I hit the target of what was happening, and without over analyzing it, just out of curiosity, and I was just so impressed by the whole experience. But back to the veil thing, it was as if the limits of my perception that keep me in this 3D world were pushed to the side, and I was able to kind of, like a submarine putting up its, what is that? Is it periscope? Is that what it's called? Right? A submarine putting up its periscope going, oh, there's a world above the water. We didn't know there was a world up here. It was very much like that. So I'm living in this 3D kind of, Newtonian experience, and then pop my head up above water and go, holy shit, there's infinite dimensions here that I'm working with and playing with. So I couldn't tell whether those dimensions are always here, or they're masked by my tether to the Newtonian physical experience, or if it took me to other dimensions as an out-of-body experience or near-death experience or something like that would. Did you get a sense of, is it either or both or all?
In the Hindu energy healing philosophies and teachings, right? They have the centers of energy called chakras, and it's supposed to open up your crown chakra or the Sahasrara chakra and exposes all the other dimensions to you. That's why the initial descriptions of people who took DMT under Rick Strassman, right? This is IV, they felt like a portal or doorway open, and in it were all the other dimensions. And for me, the experience is always like that. It's like, there are other dimensions out there that you can't see that's affecting you.
Right.
Yeah.
Side note, do you think there's any truth to the concept that taking shilajit, which is really high in fulvic acid, can assist in decalcifying the pineal gland? Scientifically, does that make sense at all?
You know what? Since I cannot quantify or measure what's in shilajit, I know that shilajit is also used to raise testosterone levels, but
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Damn! Because I take it every day in my coffee. My body likes it.
Well, it's zinc rich, so right.
Interesting.
You need zinc for testosterone production.
Interesting. Okay, because that's one of these sort of new agey things people say, but they're usually the people selling you shilajit.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how do you really prove that?
It's the old mineral combination for testosterone boosting, right? Zinc and magnesium. This is why they have zinc magnesium combos, and they add some arginine in it. And,
Right. Okay. Let me just again check the time, which is funny. I never do that, but I have such a litany of random questions here. I'm like, okay, I got to really make these last ones count. I'd like to get we're going to definitely have to do another one because I have so many questions. Okay. I did about 6 hours on deuterium on the show, deuterium depletion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my levels tested, and then I went on maybe a 2 to 3 month exclusive diet of real deuterium depleted water. There's a lot of hogwash being marketed now, which they're calling water deuterium depleted, but it's really just like my spring water, about 135 parts per million, which is not depleted. It's just lower than like seawater or your average tap water, which would be around 155. And correct me if I'm wrong. The idea with the deuterium thing is that when we have too much deuterium in our body, it damages the nanomotors in the mitochondria, which produce ATP. So your cellular energy is thereby depleted because your body's just too bogged down by deuterium. And the idea is that evolutionarily, we wouldn't have ever picked up so much deuterium from the environment because we're living as hunter-gatherer people and we're moving around, and we had the ability to burn fat and to deplete our own deuterium without having to drink some special water. Now, I felt a marked increase in energy when I took my levels down from like 146 to I think I ended up at 123 or so. And I definitely felt like more energetic and just kind of more clear. And I mentioned this to Dave Asprey when I was on Bulletproof Radio, and he was like, the whole deuterium thing, I think it's all bullshit. He said, I don't think that has really any meaningful impact on mitochondrial function. I didn't even put it in my mitochondria book because I just thought it was basically worthless junk science or something. I was like, God, I interviewed 2 brilliant PhDs for 6 hours about it. And I was very convinced. Now, of course, they sell to depleted water, so, you have to acknowledge that. Honestly, but what's your take on the relevance of deuterium and depleting it from a mitochondrial perspective?
Dom D'Agostino, right?
Yeah. Big keto guy.
Well, I also invited him to speak at a few events, and we got into talking about deuterium depleted water, and he pointed me to this article that says that the mitochondria actually depletes its own deuterium. It has a mechanism. The water that it uses, in other words, the water that's used inside the mitochondria is actually deuterium depleted water. So it's true. The body has its own mechanisms for deuterium, for making its own deuterium depleted water. I think where the contention is are you really able to absorb the deuterium depleted water, or are you just hydrating enough and with clean water such that you are actually helping your cells hydrate with a proper water and so on and so forth, such that it's able to deplete its own deuterium properly? So that's where I am on that one.
Right.
It's not exactly hogwash. It may be doing something because you're providing some water that the body may be using in order to increase its deuterium depleting capacity. It's not the water. I suspect, personally, it's not the water itself.
Right. Well, what you're describing is what was indicated by Dr. Boros, who's one of the two, I guess he's a scientist, he's a professor at UCLA, and his point of view was that your body does naturally deplete it if you're at optimum health, like we would have evolutionarily speaking. But because the body becomes so abundant in deuterium that you lose the energy to do it on your own. And so it just keeps compounding throughout your lifetime. And unless you can get your levels under 130 parts per million, then you can't deplete it on your own anymore. But if you get below that threshold, then if you're eating, a high-fat diet, keto, et cetera, and not, eating tons of fruit and high deuterium foods like processed grains and things that are just loaded with deuterium, that your body then kicks into gear and it can deplete it. And then you produce, like, as you said, your mitochondria produce this metabolic water or exclusion zone water, and then you're good. But there's this threshold that you have to get under. Does that make sense?
Yeah, he makes sense to me, but even the mitochondrial function naturally decline with age, right? So when you're about your mid-40s, you're about at the tipping point for aging according to the mitochondrial theory of aging, right? And that can be attributable to deuterium accumulation or something else. But on the whole, when I look at it, is what are the things that you can actually do in order to improve your mitochondrial biogenesis, improve its function, and so on. And I'm not discounting deuterium depleted water. It may be one of them,
Right.
right? Or something else might work for you and not deuterium depleted water. But what is interesting is that they found a way to quantify, that. And what I'd like to see is probably a quantification of how much ATP is actually being produced versus the
Right,
deuterium
right. So
depletion.
test your ATP production
Yes.
capacity
Yes.
while you're still really heavy in
Yes.
deuterium, and then do a depletion protocol, and then test
Yes.
the function of your mitochondria and how much ATP they're producing post depletion.
Yeah, you can
period,
do that now.
right?
You can test mitochondrial,
Yeah.
how much ATP the mitochondria is producing.
That's cool. Because I thought of that too. Because
Yeah.
when Dave Asprey he didn't corner me, but he's
Yeah.
like, I don't know, do you feel different? Kind of caught me off guard. And I thought, I don't know, did I just buy a bunch of this water for no reason? I was sort of second guessing. I thought, I think I have more energy, but
Yeah.
placebo is so powerful, you don't really know. How much was I just buying into the whole deuterium story, and how much did I really feel like I had more energy? And I
Yeah.
believe that I did and that I do. After that process, but I also am a big fan of lab results too, and seeing
That's-
like I was satisfied just to see, okay, I was at 146,
Yeah.
a couple months later I was at 123. I'm like, awesome. And that's testing breath and saliva. They do it two ways.
That's why I'm a big fan of what I call measured wellness, right? It's very hard to go to illness medicine doctor. It's like, oh, I took this and I felt so fantastic. But when they see the results and you present it to them, oh, you can't argue with that, right? There's an actual objective measure of what you just did. And that's how you change the perspective of illness medicine, right? Yeah, that's how you get them to work with you. It's like, before, the patients that I used to get were these very basic patients for which they already done everything, and I was the last resort, right? That was 10 years ago. Now it's like, oh, why don't we manage this with Dr. Ted or with my trainees? Why don't we manage this? Because someone's got to keep the cells healthy while you're on chemotherapy, for example, right? And that's why you measure. You measure, if even chemotherapy can raise your deuterium levels very, very rapidly.
So kind of MRI.
Yes.
Yeah, when they put the contrast fluid.
That's the gadolinium. Oh God, there's so much. I used to be an interventional neuroradiologist, so I know that there's so much side effects from gadolinium, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned that because my nephew actually got his migraines, the start of his migraines after the injection of the contrast. But one thing about MRI and jet lag, this is just an observation, n equals 1 exactly. I was having chronic headaches from sinusitis when in Asia for a bit, and so I decided, because I like the effects of magnets on my head, so I decided when I landed there one time with this massive headache to get an MRI to see what my head was really doing, and I suspected it was chronic sinusitis, and it was, right? But then for 3 or 4 days, my brain was firing on all cylinders as if I never had jet lag.
Wow.
It was incredible. I used to teach MRI, so imagine realigning all of your hydrogen atoms to one, and then letting them relax and fall, and then aligning them again, and then letting them relax and fall. And they were doing a head MRI on me. So I said, this is an expensive hack.
Right.
But man, I really missed the after that, and like on day 5, it's like I am like a tiny bit less than Superman and already in terms of a verbal fluency and logical thinking and all that kind of stuff.
Because I use various PEMF devices before and I use them all the time for different things, but before and after flying, I find that's one of the most effective, like my biocharger that you guys saw afterward. Another thing which I lent my mom for her Lyme disease is called an amp coil, and I use this other thing called a pulse centers, which is kind of more for injuries and things, but I love like magnetic therapy of all types seems to really help after landing. Do you think that's because we're so disconnected from the magnetic field for that period?
I think so. You're disconnected from the magnetic field at that period, and also when you land, you don't ground yourself, right? So there's no discharge of the electrons and so on. So you're basically just accumulating the charge within yourself. But what I think helps a lot is when your hydrogen atoms are forcibly placed into one direction.
And that's the MRI.
Yeah.
Which a PMF
yeah.
is not going to do.
No, it's not going to do. It forces it in one direction. This is the only way that you're going to go.
Oh.
Right? So I think that's the thing. That's the trick that that accomplishes that kind of hack.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to cut it at one more question here. We've got 12 minutes exactly, and my last question is a three-parter. So EMFs, I want to talk to you about this probably extensively at a later date.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with the EMF issue a lot because I'm much more sensitive to them than anyone I know. It's one of the reasons I moved to the Hollywood Hills to get away from these cell towers I was living by. They made me super sick, really bad. Then I move in here and realize since there's no cell service, I have to have Wi-Fi on all the time in my house. I'm just like, seriously? And I don't own the house, so I don't want to hardwire the whole place and go through all, so I had an EMF specialist come over. There's a horrible magnetic field at certain points because of faulty wiring.
Yeah.
I fixed the dirty electricity. Like, I'm doing everything I can. But one thing that I got about a year ago when I was still living next to the cell towers is this thing called a Blue Shield, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Not the insurance company, but Blue.
Yeah, I know them.
Okay.
I think I got their product.
Okay, so I interviewed the inventor, and this gets into that sort of like spooky woo-woo zone a little because they produce something called a scalar wave. And what I can tell you for sure is that when I lived next to the cell towers, I didn't know that's what was making me sick because I didn't know they were there. They were hidden by this kind of faux wall about maybe 100 yards from my bed, two massive cell towers. And I had...
You're lucky you didn't get cancer.
Yeah, my eyes went bad. I had to start wearing glasses. I had horrific brain fog where I almost couldn't drive. I mean, on and on and on. Headaches, insomnia, just horrible, horrible time. I went to every specialist. I could not find the answer. I didn't know what it was, but I just got one of these Blue Shield things because I kind of sort of get the scalar wave harmonizing your environment concept. And I'm pretty woo-woo guy, energetic, so I believe in all that. It's not going to kill me. If it doesn't do anything, it doesn't do anything. Even placebo would be better than nothing. So I get the thing. I have even worse headaches for about 2 weeks. I contact them and they're like, oh, that's because you're finally going into parasympathetic when you're sleeping and you're detoxing because you never do because you live in the middle of a city that's really high EMF. Then lo and behold, after a couple of weeks, I started feeling much, much better. And all of those symptoms kind of went away. Then 6 months later, I found
the placebo effect kicked in. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, it could have been. It could have been. But then I found out 6 months later, I found the cell towers just by a random recommendation from Jack Cruz again to watch the sunset. So I climb up this building next door to me to watch the sunset, open the roof, and it's like, warning, radiation, Verizon, these signs everywhere. And I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. I'm the most EMF paranoid person on the planet, and here I am living next to them. So anyway.
You didn't have a sensor?
I didn't bother doing it because I just figured my environment was high anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
But if you were going into the red, I mean...
Well, it was. Then after I found the cell tower, I did get a meter, and I was like, oh my, you got to be kidding me. I can't believe I don't have brain cancer. Thank God. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm a believer in the Blue Shield thing because I didn't know what my symptoms were from. So this thing I just threw in the corner. I didn't think about it really. And now I have it on in my house, and I have the little pocket model, and I travel with it. Do you know anything about any device's ability to harmonize your field or scalar waves or any of that stuff? Because some sciencey people that I've talked to about it are like, oh, that can't work. There's nothing in there. It's just some LED lights. It's fake. And everyone I know, it's helped. And the company, when I asked them about it, they said, well, we have a 1% return rate. So it's got to be helping someone, I mean, what do you think of all that kind of stuff?
I was an EMF gadget freak.
Oh, okay.
I even bought this, it looks like a half of an oxygen tank, and Philippines is like 220 volts, it's 110, and I basically just exploded.
I just exploded a light bulb in Spain. I put in my amber light bulb. I'm sitting there with my girlfriend, all of a sudden, boom! Yeah, so lesson learned.
Yeah, actually, my house in DC was built in 1904. It's a very old Victorian. And so I had to do a lot of remediation in terms of the EMF. I started with Stetzer filters.
Sure. The dirty electricity.
Yeah, so all of my outlets have that because this is like retrofitting, right? I started with those, and then I actually gravitated towards the non-powered ones. The coils and stuff. They're in my windows.
Yeah.
I have a big post behind me where all the electrical wires of the neighbors are coming in from.
Sure.
I'm in this historic district. It's very old, and the post is right behind my house. And I measured it, and it's really very high, right? So
magnetic or electric field?
Electric and magnetic,
Oh, okay.
both.
Yeah.
So what I did was I started putting out, first the powered ones like the Blue Shield and stuff,
Yeah.
and then I started putting in this non-powered ones. They're coils or circles that you can
Like those
purchase.
copper
Yeah,
coils and
there's
stuff?
this company out of Canada. They uses biogeometry and for EMF reduction. And they come in cubes, and I have that too. And my best, my best proof, you can call it proof, that it harmonizes things is that I had a schizophrenic come to my house and sat, and he said, "Oh my God," he said, "what did you do to your place? My brain is so quiet here." I said,
Wow.
"I have no voices speaking to me. I have no voices telling me what to do." So I said, "Well, must be working."
Right.
I have no other proof that it
Yeah.
harmonizes other than that. And he always wanted to come to the house because of that, right? Because as soon as he enters the house, boom, his brain quiets down.
Well, that's the thing about it is from the, completely scientific, quantifiable place. There's these devices, and they don't block, air quotes, they
yeah.
don't block the EMF because
Yeah,
you
they
could.
just
My Blue
harmonize,
Shield's
yeah.
in here. You can still come in with a meter and pick up tons of
Yeah.
Wi-Fi. So it's like that's what's annoying about it because you can't prove it. The only way to really block is the shielding paint and the shielding fabric and the Faraday cages and all that, which is.
I even have a helmet.
I have.
the cloth one.
I
you
have
put
one
over-
too. Yeah, I sleep in one, much to the chagrin of my girlfriend. Yeah, she's not a fan, but anyway, I get a healthier brain. All right, dude. Well, we got to get you out of here in a moment. So, one last question in our last couple of minutes here. You've taught me so much today. Like I said, we can go on and on forever, and hopefully we will at another point. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have taught you or influenced you that you might share with our listeners?
Actually, I'm very lucky with mentors. So I'm not looking at historical figures, right? When in the Philippines, I was mentored by 3 wonderful people who taught me. They were all pioneers in their field in pharmacology and toxicology, interventional neuroradiology, and neurology. And then they said, "You're causing too much commotion in this country. Time for you to leave." That's a story for another time. And when I came to the United States, I was mentored by the pioneer of medical informatics. He started the whole field. His name is William Yamamoto. When I first entered his lab, he asked me, he said, "Is beauty computable?" And I said, "Yes." "Is consciousness computable?" I said, "Yes." "In this lab, you get to choose only one problem." I should have chosen beauty. I could have gotten rich faster. But what he taught me is that you're a Western trained scientist, meaning you know how to dig down and you know how to analyze or break things into pieces. In this lab, you're going to go laterally, pull things together from various domains of knowledge, and synthesize things. So that's what our research is missing, is the capacity to synthesize. That's why the problem that I settled with in that lab is consciousness an intrinsic property of complex systems, or is it an emergent property of complex systems? So that's one of my greatest influences in the way I think. The second one is a dear friend of mine. He started the whole movement of socially responsible investing in 1984. His name is Wayne Silby. He founded the Calvert Group. And his thing is now not called socially responsible, it's called high impact investing, right? And the way he thinks is like this: is that Ted in 2000, I think 2004 or 6, he said, "Ted, come help me invest in China," right? And I said, "Why?" I said, "Can you imagine if each Chinese wanted a car? What would happen to the environment?" And that's the kind of thinking that he infused me with, is that you're a steward of this planet. You're also a part of it, and you should take care of everything else that's in it, because we're in it together. The connectedness of everything, right? He's the one who actually 20 years ago told me about ayahuasca, and I didn't mind it until I was able to do it on my own terms, right?
Right.
Right. But and that's a kind of, for example, when I deal, like, for example, I invest in small companies, right? And when I deal with people, what I learned from him is fairness. Always deal fairly with other people. No matter how much you're tempted because you could get away with it, no, put in the fairness in there. And that's very, very important, right? And the biggest influence for me is not human. I call her Mother Ayahuasca, or Mama Aya, as I call her, because essentially pulled out the rug from under me that this is the only reality there is, and basically solidified that this is a consensus reality that we're living in, and there are other realities out there that precede even this reality, right? So I'd like to say to my students and to people I talk to, is that we're nothing but a shadow of those worlds. We occur late.
Wow.
Yeah, we occur late.
Wow.
So if you have to work on something, you have to work on something up there before you can work on something up
Wow.
here. Like, all of these issues about trauma and everything else, you have to work on it on that level before you can get better here. So there's a lot of that stuff that comes in wordless teaching, right? When you take pharmacologist, or as my friends tease me, Achacoso, because my last name is Achacoso, right? When you do that, you begin the biggest gift that I have received from her is this intense sense of security, right? That everything is all right, and that everything is alive. Everything. I spent one of my birthdays in one of the private island in one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and I was chest deep in water, and it was just this gratitude, and you could feel the entire. I closed my eyes, and you could feel the entire earth vibrating. You could feel the water vibrating, just embracing you, right? You look at the sun, and the sun is like yes, we hear you. You see that aliveness. It infuses everything that you do. You said when we came in here with so much energy, that's because for us everything is alive, right? Everything is alive. A rock in there has its own consciousness. We don't say that it's conscious only because we cannot become a rock. Right. So these are my influences. People who have influenced me heavily, and spirits that have influenced me heavily in my current incarnation.
Wow.
Right?
That might just be the deepest closing of all episodes of the show. If I didn't need these mics for another episode, I would say drop the mic. I don't want to buy new ones. Dude, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lastly, where can we find you? Any websites or social media you want to drop?
Yes. The blue carnitine is at troscriptions.com. That's TROS. And then like prescriptions. You can take a look at that. That's also Troscriptions in Instagram. And then there is my nonprofit, which was just approved as a nonprofit organization this year to teach doctors and health practitioners about health optimization, medicine, and practice. You can access that at homehope.org. Or if you want the longer name, healthoptimizationmedicine.org, but that's a mouthful. So homehope.org. And then my company in the Philippines is biobalanceinstitute.com.
Spell that for us.
Biobalanceinstitute.com.
Okay, cool. Wow.
Okay.
Thank you so much, dude. Let's get you to LAX so you can stay in balance. Thanks so much for joining me.
All right. Thank you.